Hi everybody, welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We are coming to you live on July 7th, 2025. For anybody who doesn't know, our Cathedra webinars get their name from the Creek word for learning. And today you're going to be learning the roles and responsibilities of the Board of Commissioners from your instructor, Cheryl A. Cosley, who's principal of Cheryl A. Cosley and Associates Housing Consulting and Management Services. This is day one of a 5-day series. So welcome to day one. We're so happy that you could be here. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law printed here, so this is just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. As we go through this webinar series, you might want to check in periodically for the PDF of the slides, or maybe you miss a day and you want to go back and check the recording. Know that all of that can be accessed in the courses section under the title of the webinar. Cheryl has put together a really extensive list of resource items for you. I do have a link to the presentation slides themselves, but the rest of the resource items that she's going to reference, you can find that in the courses section too, and all of them are available for download for you. Throughout the week, as you log in during the webinar time to join the rest of the days of the series, you'll just click on this green banner at the top of the screen and you'll join just like you did today. We do ask that you try to join with listen-only capabilities because it helps to cut down on audio feedback, but no worries if you don't. You can always just mute yourself. But if you find that you've joined and your sound isn't coming out of the right device, maybe you're trying to use your headphones, maybe you have a speaker that you're trying to use, you can come down to the bottom of the screen and you can click on that little telephone icon, and that's going to bring up a list of your mic and your speaker devices if you need to change where your audio output's coming from. There are different ways to interact during the webinar. We do encourage class participation. We will primarily rely on the public chat. So if you don't yet have it open, you can open it by going over to the messages panel and clicking on public chat. And then any questions or comments, if you have some tech support issues you'd like me to help you navigate, just come down here to where it says send message to public chat, click, type in what you want to say, and then you can either hit enter or you can click on this cute little paper airplane button and that will submit it. With Cheryl, a lot of the questions that you ask might end up getting answered through the course of the presentation. So we're going to try to save questions to the end. But if you want to send it into the public chat, just to kind of have the question ready, feel free to do that. And then we also have a shared notes section, and you can find a bunch of helpful links. There are links found throughout the presentation, links to the webinar feedback survey, to our YouTube archive, different things like that. But I have already placed the link to today's presentation slides into the chat, and I'm going to do that once more now. All right, folks, we would love it if you took a moment to introduce yourself in the public chat. Let us know your name, where you're tuning in from. It's fun to see all the different tribal nations that are represented, your work or your role in Indian country. It probably led you to today's webinar. And then your tribal affiliation. If you have one, you might just be a tribal employee and not have tribal affiliation. That's okay too. And then just a quick final note before I turn it over to Cheryl. If y'all click on that far left menu panel in red, that's all the way to the left-hand side of your screen, I just want to give you a heads up that once you click on that, it is going to pull you out of the webinar and it's going to take you to whatever you've selected on that menu. You can always just rejoin by clicking on the green banner again, but I did want to give you a heads up that if you click on that, it'll pull you right out. So just something to be mindful of. All right, folks, while you're introducing yourselves in the chat, it is with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructor, Cheryl A. Cosley. And Cheryl, I have made you presenter now.
Thank you very much. Okay, so welcome to day one of 5. I hope you join us the entire week, and I do hope that you get some good learning out of here. This is, like she said, brought to you courtesy of the Native Learning Center and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We fall under the Office of Native American Programs, so welcome and good afternoon. And my name, as she said, is Cheryl Cosley. My Anishinaabe name is Redbird Woman. I'm Loon Clan, and I come from Place of the Pike, which in my language is called Keno-Shinkoning. It's the Bay Mills Indian community, and our reservation is located at the top of Michigan. Our waters actually border Canada. I served as Director of Housing for my tribe for 28 years. During that time frame, I served as the chairperson for the Great Lakes Indian Housing Association, GLEHA. for 7 years. That's the 31 tribes that surround the Great Lakes. And I was also honored to serve on the board of directors for the National American Indian Housing Council. I did 16 years as secretary and then became, the vice chair. And then I served as a 2-term chairwoman, so four years as the chairwoman. I also started Cheryl Cosley and Associates in March of 2019, and I provide training and technical assistance virtually and in person throughout the lower 48 and Alaska. So I'm on the road or teaching virtually a lot, but that I'm really blessed because I continue, I've been able to continue to do what I love and help our people. So my information is at the beginning and the end. If you should ever have any questions, please reach out to me. If I'm not teaching virtually or on a flight or whatever, I will always try to answer you. So this training is being offered to help housing board members understand the background, the history in NAHASDA, which is the Native American Housing and Assistance and Self-Determination Act. It's to help develop your rules, your knowledge of the rules, the federal rules and the regulations that we have to adhere to, or you have to adhere to when you're accepting funding from HUD. And your leadership, that role as a board of commissioner or a board member. Hopefully you're going to learn of those requirements, housing programs, all the things that we have to have in place to run a successful housing program, and the role of the housing board as a commissioner within this process. So as Brooke said, there is a lot of reference materials, and I would really recommend that you grab them, you download them. The HUD website is kind of a little bit difficult to navigate right now. They're asking people for recommendations. They're rebuilding it again. The first 3 reference materials are the NAHASDA statute, the regulations, and the uniform administrative requirements. In conjunction with our program guidances and the PIH notices, those are the rules to how we have to run our programs, spend the money, things like that. That's the only place we can get those guidances, is off of those documents and the Code Talk website. So I really hope if you don't come away with anything else, you'll know how to utilize those to answer your questions and where to go and seek information. There's a lot of additional reference materials in here, insurance requirements, required policies. When you build, you have to build within a total development cost, what that is, a policy status table, assisting your non-low income family members, calculating your rent and the guidance along with that. So there's 28, I believe, actual documents here, and I snapped out of it. So I've got to see if I can get back into that. Brooke, can you help me out?
Hi. Yeah, sorry. Did you lose the slide?
I did. I actually brought up, I think, yes, I did.
Is it full screen now?
No, not at all. I've got the complete chat on the one side, and the agenda is what's showing. So I think
that's what I'm seeing on this end too, is the agenda slide.
Okay, but I don't have any screens to go forward or anything. No arrows.
I'm going to take presenter real quick and then give it back to you and see if they kind of reappear.
Okay.
Are you able to see it now?
Nope.
No. Do you want to maybe try zooming out on your mouse?
It won't let me do it. Oh yeah, it does, but it won't.
The arrows aren't there.
Yeah.
Do you want to try exiting real quick and coming back in?
So. Okay.
Okay. I'll be right here to make you presenter again. Sorry about that. Sorry about this, folks. We'll be back in just a moment. A little bit of technical difficulties. Cheryl's just exiting the room and coming back in, so it'll be just a moment here.
Okay, we did it. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you, Brooke, for your assistance. Brianna in the background, now you know what happens. Okay, so this is the agenda for the week. There are a lot of different categories that we're going to go through. Eligible participants. Like I said, we're going to go how to navigate NAHASDA. We're going to talk about eligible families, the payments that you charge, your Indian housing plan, your APR, the use of GEMS, self-monitoring, annual performance reports, the formula, the board's role, some of the federal requirements that you have to make sure that we have in place, our conflict of interest requirements that we have to follow, wages when you're doing building, some of those things. So those other various federal requirements that we have to follow. And there's a ONAP monitoring plan that we're going to end the week with, and that's pretty much going to give you a pretty intensive idea about what they're going to look for when they come in and they do a review. HUD does a review of your programs, not your auditor itself, but the auditor will be looking for that too. So I hope you enjoy it and stick with us for the whole week if possible. And we'll get on with the NAHASDA overview. So the overview of NAHASDA, the statutes and the regulations. You start off with, what is NAHASDA? Well, it's the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act of 1996. The objectives, are to promote affordable housing, to assist with that, to promote self-sufficiency, help you plan for your infrastructure, promote capital markets, and to give us better access to mortgage markets for our tribal people. When you look at the statute, it's broke down into titles. So that's how you go about trying to search it. Title I is the block grant requirements. The 2 is your affordable housing activities. Title III is your allocation of grant amounts. Title IV is your compliance, your audit reports. 5 is the termination of assistance under incorporated programs. 6 is the federal guarantees for financing tribal housing activities. 7 is other housing activities that you can undertake. And 8 is our sister program for the Native Hawaiians. They have one that mirrors our NAHASDA program. So to find the statute, to find anything, you're going to go to Code Talk. So that's an actual link in there. Or you could go to HUD and try to search for Code Talk, but you have to make sure you get over to Native American programs to do that. Our statute has been revised. We always try to make sure that you have the current one. And NAHASDA came about basically in 1996. And this would be like some of the reference materials that it talks about NAHASDA on Code Talk, where you can read about that. When you pull up NAHASDA as a whole, it's color-coded by amendment. So every time that it was changed, you can see the strikeouts, the negotiated rulemaking, and we'll talk about them in a second. The people that were at that table, the changes that they made to the statute. So when they changed the formula, when they changed the rules, or they changed NAHASDA, they convey negotiated rulemaking, and you can see that by the color coding of the NAHASDA statute when you go to read it. These are some of the various times that they've changed it in the past. So an overview, it reorganized, the housing assistance provided to Native Americans through HUD, and it eliminated several separate programs that we received, and it replaced them with an overall block grant amount. And the thought process behind that was, we'll give you the money. You decide if you want to undertake this program. It's still a legal activity, but you need to take it out of your NAHASDA funds. So the block grant programs authorized 4 Indian tribes under NAHASDA, the Indian Housing Block Grant, which is IHBG. There's a Title VI, which is a loan guarantee program. And then we have, like I said, the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant, which came about in 2000, and it's the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant, so it's NHHBG. So the regulations, they're published under 24 CFR Part 1000. So if you ever read any guidance and you see this 1000 number, that tells you you need to go to that portion of those regulations. That's not the NAHASDA statute. So the first place you go to look is the NAHASDA statute. And it's going to refer you probably to 1000, or it could refer you to the 200 document, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That has to do with anything finance and cash related, monitoring, auditing, things like that. So the Indian Housing Block Grant is IHBG, and it's a formula-based program where we're also going to talk about the formula and how they come upon how much each tribe is going to receive. It was, like I said, amended in 2000 to add the Native Hawaiians to the program, and their regulations are published at 24 CFR Part 1006. So the key point to the NAHASDA statute, it was signed into law in October of 1996. It provides a block grant to tribes or tribally designated housing entities. It's used for activities defined within your Indian housing plan. So if you're going to do something, you have to make sure that that activity is described within your Indian housing plan, which the tribe and TDHE, they're going to write and submit to HUD for review. It defines your TDHE as the existing IHA, which was established under the U.S. Housing Act of 1937 and is not the Indian Housing Authority. And tribes can establish their own entities through self-governance powers or by state law. So it permits the tribe to set a maximum rent. Okay, this would be the other thing that you have to make sure that you always understand. We are not allowed to charge our tenants over 30% of their monthly adjusted income if they are low income. Now, if they fall between 80 and 100%, you may charge them more. Matter of fact, it's necessary under most circumstances that you do. But if they're under and they're low income, you can't, exceed that 30%. It requires the tribe to use the block grant to operate and maintain their current housing units. It distributes our grant through an allocation formula, which is developed, like I said, under negotiated rulemaking. It authorizes that Title VI, which is the loan guarantee program, and it allows the tribes to use, with the Secretary's approval, a federal guarantee to undertake affordable housing activities that does not exceed over 5 times the amount of the need portion of the grant that you receive on a yearly basis. Okay. It reauthorizes that loan guarantee. It extended our leasehold interest in our trust and restricted land for housing purposes up to 50 years. So we can, put a larger and a longer mortgage product on them. It expands affordable housing opportunities, specifically addresses people who are above low income, because under the 37 Act, we weren't supposed to serve them. Now we can service up to 10% of our grant are families that fall between 80 and 100%. We also have provisions for law enforcement officers and essential families, even when they're above income, okay? And it requires HUD to monitor for non-compliance and to take steps when that compliance does not occur. So the key points to NAHASDA: that block grant is used to operate and maintain our current housing units, distributes our block grant through an allocation formula, which is developed under negotiated rulemaking, and it can be used for development, rehab, acquisition, housing support services such as counseling, loan processing, and you can actually initiate model housing programs if HUD approves them. So what is a negotiated rulemaking? That's the process of developing regulations. It is mandated by the NAHASDA statute. We're one of the, probably, I think it is, we're the only organization that's mandated. It requires HUD to use negotiated rulemaking when we develop or change our regulations, or we do anything to alter our formula, okay? Those approved documents, that's an active link. You can get to them through there. It's an unusual way of writing regulations, and it was significant because it was the first step in implementing self-determination. The regulations replaced all of the rules that we fell under the 1937 Housing Act, and it set forth necessary policies and procedures for the administration of our programs. So we were reauthorized several times. Some of our rulemaking, will take 2 to 3 years when it takes place, 9 meetings. And they're really pushing through Congress to permanently authorize NAHASDA, but it hasn't been done yet. So the regulations, that's what you look at after you look at the NAHASDA statute to see if what you would like to do is allowed, or what you're doing if it's allowed. The NAHASDA regulations are found under 24 CFR Part 1000. They are in your reference materials under 2. So they have been amended multiple times. Always try to keep the most updated versions. I keep a printed version. It's good for about a year, but you always get online to see if they've changed anything else since your printed version. It is also broke down within subparts: general objectives, affordable housing activities, your Indian housing plan, the allocation formula, federal guarantees for financing, recipient monitoring, compliance, oversight, and accountability. So these are the contents of those subparts. Subpart A talks about the legal authority for the regulation, the laws that impact NAHASDA, our conflict of interest, provisions that apply to our programs, some of the key terms that are used. Subpart B talks about regulations, amendments to implement affordable housing, some of our affordable allowable activities, eligible beneficiaries, cost payment limits, our existing housing stock. If it was 1937 housing stock, it comes with a subsidy attached to it. So they're very, very picky about making sure that we take care of that stock. And the allocation formula, it establishes the formula for the allocation amounts available for a fiscal year. Federal guarantees, financing for tribal housing activities, terms and conditions by which HUD's going to guarantee obligations issued by a recipient for the purposes of financing eligible housing activities, and your recipient monitoring, oversight, and accountability. The monitoring, the compliance, the performance reports, our audits, and some of the remedies for non-compliance that HUD could actually undertake. So our regulations, there's a lot more than this. These are some of the key ones, but as you can see, they start out with 1,000. So under 10, it goes over the definitions. 12 is non-discrimination. 14 speaks to relocation and real property acquisition. We have to follow that additional federal law, as well as the environmental review requirements under 18. Our administrative requirements are found under 26. Our conflict of interest from 30 to 34. Records retention, how long we have to keep the records within our offices, are found at 1036. Affordable housing under 101. Eligible affordable housing activities under 102. If we want tenant or project-based rental assistance under 103. Speaking to our eligible families, and we have a section on this, is under 104. The conditions for a non-low-income Indian family's participation is found under 110, and tribal and Indian preference or tribal preference in selecting families for housing. You're able, as the governing body, to set preferences within your A&O policy. Now, your A&O policy is the most important policy in my mind of all the policies of your housing entity. It basically tells you what you can and cannot do, who you can serve, how much you're going to charge, what rules you're going to enforce. It's a hugely important document. But we have a lot of different regulations that impact our NAHASDA programs. Your NAHASDA program is the most heavily regulated program that your tribe will offer. It's got a lot of separate components to it, and it doesn't matter if you have a staff of 2 or a staff of 50, you have to follow all of those same rules and regulations. It gets more difficult with the smaller staff, but then you're usually undertaking less activities. So sometimes you don't go into those realms, but there's a lot of different rules that we have to make sure that we adhere to. Some of them being the uniform administrative requirements found under 2 CFR Part 200. Now, that particular document your tribe will use, okay? That is the only document that govern both of us. They govern your procurement, they govern your auditing, they govern your finance and the finance components. The American Disabilities Act, GAAP, which was also under 200, your generally accepted accounting principles. So ours are the same as the tribes. Travel would be the same as the tribes. I shouldn't say that. The housing entity is allowed to follow the tribes or follow GSAs. And then you have the Uniform Relocation Act. Those are just some of the ones that we have to follow, though. There's a lot of them. So we have a hierarchy of rules. NAHASDA is a law written by Congress. If it says you have to do it, you have to do it. It's a do not pass go. Okay. NEPA, when it comes to our environmentals, we're supposed to do environmentals before we expend any type of money whatsoever. NEPA is almost the same way. You have to be really, really careful and make sure you adhere to those. So I also teach tribal councils, and I often will ask them, please let your housing authority, if you have an environmental staff, if you have biologists, who do your environmentals, our tribe does, please, share them with your housing entity. It's one less really, really time consuming thing that's very, very important that could be done by a professional. And then your housing program actually, would have more time to undertake the rest of the regulations that we have to follow. So I often will ask them, share those resources as well as perhaps your legal teams. Our leases, there's certain things that we produce that we have to do. Our policies, before we put them in place, the lawyers should be looking at them. And I often ask them, you don't have to charge your housing authority or your entity to do those. Why don't you do those, free of charge? They're going to benefit all of your tribal members. So then we fall under the regulations, which we have to follow. 24 CFR Part 1000, we just talked about that. 2 CFR Part 200, which the tribe's going to follow also. And 24 CFR Part 50 and 58, which is the environmental requirements. Then we have HUD guidances. We have program guidances and PIH notices. When you look, if you went into the HUD website right now, 3/4 of it is public housing and it has nothing to do with us. You have to get over to the Native American program side. And normally it will say PIH or PIHN, which means Public and Indian Housing Notice. That means it applies to us. Up to this point, they were always separated, so there was no confusion. Under the changes that have taken place in that last couple of months, they took down the website, then they put it back up, and they're trying to rebuild it right now. So right now, they've got some notices in there intertwined that do not pertain to us. So you're always going to look for PIH or PIHN because some of them, are for the public housing side and they don't apply to us. Then you've got your tribal code. You could have wage ordinances or housing ordinances. You have to follow those. And then you have your program policies, which you're responsible, for the adoption of. Your A&O policy, your procurement policy, all of those. And then you have the standard operating procedures for your housing program. So compliance criteria is found in several different places. That admissions and occupancy policy, you go to 1000 and you go 1004 through 1010. 1020, 1024 to 1056. And then under the NAHASDA Section 203A1, all speaks to some of the requirements of that admissions and occupancy policy. Your management and personnel, a lot of that falls under that 2 CFR Part 200. Maintenance, under the NAHASDA statute, under 203B and 203E. Our travel policy, again, goes under 200, 474. Procurement is under 200. 317 to 326. And then 24 CFR 1026 also speaks to our procurement. We have got a couple exceptions when we're using NAHASDA funds only that apply, and you can read about them there or in the NAHASDA statute. Real property acquisition applies to us also. That's under 1014 and a separate citation under 49 CFR Part 24. Relocation under 1014 and 49 CFR Part 24. And conflict of interest provisions are found under 1030 through 36. And there's a guidance document that's in your reference materials that speak to conflict of interest. And we will talk about that during this week. Hopefully, you'll be around the whole week to pop in for that. There's certain steps that you have to take when you're placing somebody in a household, if you're assisting them and they're related to members of the tribal council, members of the board of commissioner, members of the family of your housing staff. And it's outlined pretty much within those documents, and we're going to speak to it. And sometimes you're actually required to notify HUD and put a posting up, for 7 days. So make sure that you do pay attention to that so you're adhering to those actual policies. And then the general procurement standards under 200-318. These aren't even all of them. These are the ones that, we really have to make sure that we're paying attention to, but there is a lot, Indian preference requirements. They're found under 1000 between 48 and 54. Labor standards, when we're doing any type of building, we have to build under a total development cost. We have to follow Davis-Bacon. There's all sorts of requirements that we have to undertake. I've been doing this since 1990, and I learn something almost every week still. That's how hard. It's a hard position. The director's position is a really hard position because there's a lot of regulations that they have to learn. Environmental clearance, you can read about some of those from 1018 to 24. 24 CFR Part 58. Lead-based paint. Sometimes you look at the age of the unit. We don't have any lead-based paint in there. And our housing entities will forget we're giving rehab assistance or emergency assistance. And we have to make sure that there's no lead-based paint in the household that we're helping with those NAHASDA funds. So, there's different things in there we have to make sure that we adhere to. Accessibility laws found under 1012 and 24 CFR Part 8. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and making sure that we carry flood insurance if we're within, an area that calls for that. So, as I said, 2 CFR 200, those uniform administrative requirements, those you should, the tribe will be familiar with anyway, because they have to fall under those same actual requirements and use that document. It's my least favorite of all the documents that we use because it's not written specifically for housing. So for me, it was the most difficult to use or get used to. What pertains to me and what doesn't. So 2 CFR Part 200, it's to ensure the accountability of all the federal funding. OMB establishes uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, audit requirements for federal awards to us as a non-federal entity. The regulations that implement NAHASDA include a variety of general administrative requirements. Depending, I still see them once in a while. I go out quite often and make sure that our tribes are compliant with their policies. So they'll, have me come in and I try to make sure that the policies are NAHASDA compliant, and you get to the finance portion or procurement even, and you'll see these numbers: OMB Circular A87, OMB Circular A102. Well, these were replaced. They were replaced a while back ago, over 10 years. But some of our tribes haven't changed the policies to reflect the new numbers. So if any of your policies refer to those prior regulatory documents, you need to update those policies immediately. And like I said, it would be your finance and your procurement ones. They were replaced by 2 CFR 200. So they streamlined the federal government's guidances. They used to fall under 8 circulars, all starting with, those A's. And then they redid it under 2 CFR Part 200. And that took place in 2013. Those administrative requirements, cost principles, they represent standard entities, what you have to meet, what you have to implement, the threshold for those standards. And those standards, you can organize your core management systems, your accounting system, your property management, your procurement, and the management of that. Got to have a good procurement policy. You could use the same one as the tribes. We're actually allowed higher thresholds under certain circumstances, and we'll talk about that only when you're using the NAHASDA dollars later on in the week. And then your personnel, your travel management, and your records management. But they're all governed by that 2 CFR Part 200. Your management systems, you have to have written policies and procedures. You have to carry insurance. HUD's rule of thumb is if it can be insured, it should be. Because if it's not, we're not going to let you cover the replacement cost with HUD funds, okay? Drug-free workplace, procurement policy, your record keeping, your reporting, your conflict of interest, your audits, your allowable and your unallowable cost, and certain mandatory disclosures, which you have to actually make sure that you take. So 2 CFR Part 200 gives you those uniform administrative requirements, and there's cost principles, but they don't provide specific procedural requirements or components. It's up to you as the governing body to make sure that they have those in there. They're going to issue broad basic standards. It's up to you and that federal entity to create the details, the policies, the people, the operational procedures, your forms, your documentation, to build that adequate management system. So you're defining and designing, installing, and implementing that adequate management system becomes, first of all, the essential work of your executive director, the management of your housing authority, and ultimately you, if you're the ones responsible for making sure that those policies are adopted. You should have your eyes on your policies of your housing entity at least once a year. You should be looking at one set of them. Our rules and our regulations are constantly changing. I mean, from 2 months from now, 3 guidance documents were redone. Well, when you're referring to a guidance document in your procurement, you got to make sure, or your procurement, any of your policies, you have to make sure you're quoting the right policy. Policy is almost a full-time job, and you are charged with making sure that you've adopted, policies that are up to date. So if you need help, you can always, request help free of charge from HUD, and they will get you somebody to help make sure that your policies are up to date. Keep taking classes like this. You're going to find them, all of these, you can download them. You can say, oh, this is a new policy for this. What does ours say? To make sure that they're kind of up to date. So not kind of, they have to be up to date, but your subparts at a glance of that 200 document are the acronyms and definitions, general provisions, the pre-federal award requirements, the contents of your awards, your post-federal requirements, the cost principles, and your audit requirements. So because we, as housing entities, some of us struggled with 200 because, like I said, it's not written specifically for us. HUD actually put out 9 guidance sessions, and they're on YouTube. You could watch them also. You can go through this link to get to them. They're 10 and 12-minute clips, but they'll help you understand that particular government, that document yourself, though. So when you're reading uniform guidance, they're very precise in using the terms should and must. Should means it's a best practice. Must means it is required. So how are we going to navigate our NAHASDA guidance? And this is, I don't know why I started with day one. You need to know what our rules are and where to find them, especially in your position as a board member. So to understand our program requirements, you have to understand how to research. First, you start with the NAHASDA statute. That's where you go first. And it's the first one in your reference materials, okay? She's got them all pinned here. Then you go to the regulations at 24 CFR Part 1000. That's the second reference material there. And the third one is 2 CFR Part 200, Uniform Administrative Requirements. That's the last place I go, unless you know it's finance related, okay? Then, you know, we have our program guidances and our PIH notices. So the statute is federal law written by Congress. It can only be changed by an act of Congress. So if you read that statute and it says you have to do something, you have to do it. There's a do not pass go. You can't, you know, it's a federal law. It can't be waived because it is a law instituted by Congress. The regulations at CFR Title 24 Part 1000, they're written to implement the statute. They can be waived by a departmental secretary, in our case, HUD, as long as that waiver is not, if it doesn't conflict with the statute itself. The regulation section, you can read about that at 1008 for more information. They are administered by our federal agency designated in the statute to oversee our new program. In our case, it's HUD, and then it wheedles down to the Office of Native American Programs. The negotiated rulemaking committee that was charged with drafting the regulations decided they were not going to restate any information that was already stated within the statute itself unless the statute was unclear. So you have to be able to refer both to the statute and the regulations simultaneously to have a complete understanding of NAHASDA. I'm just going to grab them, but I have them over there. I was using them in my RV. I keep a printed one all the time because you have to make sure when you write a policy, when you're looking at somebody's policy, that it conforms with both these documents, okay? So the regulations used to get to me, and I shouldn't say used to get to me, they still get to me because they're written in a question and answer format. And sometimes you get there and it's like, that's not the question that I have, but that's how they're written, okay? You're going to go first to the statute, then the regs, and they will refer you from one to the other. I often will find myself next to the copier making, okay, this has to do with this. Now it's sending me over here, and this is what it says about it here, and here's the program guidance on it, so I'm going to have a copy of that too, and this all has to do with this one subject. You can't find anything in just one place. It forces you to look. So sometimes a good thing, sometimes a bad thing. If you're there for a while, it's a good thing because while you're reading, you're learning about the rest of the rules, even if that's not what you were looking for. That's how you learn about the program. So the guidance bulletins and those notices are issued by HUD periodically and available electronically. They used to mail everything to us. All we had to do was open the mail. Doesn't work that way anymore. We have to get online and go to Code Talk. What I can show you is what I always have my staff members do and what I do to this day. Our program guidances, our PIH notices are by year. As you can see when you go through like the listing on the first couple of slides of those reference materials. So every time one came out, sometimes it'll replace something, sometimes it won't. If it replaced it, I would go back to what it replaced and I'd keep it in there, but I would put replaced by 2025-11, you know, by year. And that's how you have them readily available. And I would keep them also in the conference room so the board members could read them. Now, that one there was the program guidances. I've got one of the PIH notices just as big sitting over there right now. Your meeting minutes are your other thing, okay? Make sure that you have a copy of every set of your meeting minutes. Your auditors will look at it, and your HUD monitoring will look at that also, okay? It's really, really important. Your guidance bulletins assist tribes to implement the block grant program. They provide tools for your management. They clarify your technical topics to the extent your guidance bulletins are actually advisory. They're designed to help the tribes implement their program. There are no waivers needed for those. So the difference, basically, the guidance bulletins and the notices help illustrate the statute and the regulations. The guidance bulletins will further explain our regulations or the statute, and the waiver provisions actually, regarding those documents will still hold true. Those HUD notices are official transmittals to recipients regarding, typically our policy issues and our procedural topics. They'll find an area that tribes are struggling with, or the regions themselves will perceive them and sometimes get guidance differently depending on where you're at. And they'll say, nope, we got a problem here. And they'll put out a publication to make sure that everybody's doing things the same way. The information in our HUD notices can be waived by the Assistant Secretary for Native American Programs unless it actually relates to that regulation or the statute. So this is a PIH notice. It means Public and Indian Housing. The last couple of years, they put the N on there for notice. So you'll see PIH or PIHN. That tells you it applies to us. It's not just public housing, okay? This one is providing interim funding to recipients of Indian housing block grants. And it'll cross-reference other documents and other places in there. So they, like I said, used to mail us. All you had to do was open your mail. Now there is nothing that we get through the mail anymore. We have to go get everything through Code Talk itself. Now, this is an example of a program guidance. This is probably not a good one. It's the process for repayment of federal funds should you have have been found to spend them wrong or not declare your units, when they convey your mutual help units, things like that. You're supposed to let HUD know, take them off the books so you quit getting that subsidy. Or if you are getting a subsidy, perhaps for your 37 Housing Act rentals, and you're not renting them, or they're not being used, you turn it into a laundromat or something like that, then you're not allowed that subsidy anymore. You need to be very protective of that subsidy. That's the only thing, a rental subsidy, basically, is ongoing. You need to protect those units and first on your maintenance when they are vacant, you get those back up and into your stock as soon as possible. It's really, really important. So this is your example of your program guidance. So the difference between the statute, the regs, and the guidance, the statute, regulations, notices, our guidance bulletins, they are, that's our complete picture frame of the puzzle, basically. It gives you the full picture of each grant recipient's opportunities and our responsibilities. So the PIH notices are issued by the Assistant Secretary for Public and Indian Housing. Our program guidances are issued by our Deputy Assistant Secretary for Native American Programs. And everything is through Code Talks. And you can hit PIH notices or program guidances, and then you can go back into time to get all of these ones within those binders there. It's really important, and it gives you the rules, that we have to follow. So this Code Talk, this is where you have to go. Your executive director should be looking at Code Talk once a week. And there's a section in there called Dear Tribal Leader. or the Deer Tribal Leader letters section. I always stumble over that one. That's where a lot of our important information is found. And even if you're not a tribal leader, you need to get into that section also. That's where a lot of, really important current announcements are found. So Code Talk is where you guys got to go to get everything. Okay. Bookmark it, program guidances, PIH notices, Deer Tribal Leader, letters, the statute, the regulations, there's forms on there, there's best practices. So this is of a couple of weeks ago after they have changed things around. This is kind of what it looks like if you get into Code Talk, if you can get into, the Department of Housing and Urban Development and you get over to the Office of Native American Programs side. Okay. You don't want to be in the public housing. And then this is the easiest way I found it right now under this current format is to go under everything A to Z. Then it's kind of all listed in there. But ONAP programs, our competitive programs, our Indian Community Development Program, COVID-19 resources, Tribal HUD VASH, Section 184, that's our loan guarantee product, Title VI loan guarantee, and then the Hawaiian programs. But everything A to Z has got most of it where you can grab it again. Calendar of events and trainings, best practices by activity, by region, about ONAP, some of the archives, historic preservation consultation, our income limits, they were just published again, the Indian Community Development Block Grant. So there's a lot of information in there. And that's where you would get, your 184 information, mold remediation, all of it. Program guidances, that's where you would click and it'd bring you there. The regulations, that's another one that you're going to have to explore. So, and then it updated this, but the update that they just put on there isn't really updated. It talks about Epic and GEMS. We don't use Epic anymore. All we use is GEMS. So it talks about it since 2023. We've been using GEMS. So some places are still not up to date yet. Okay. Your Indian housing plan, your annual performance reports, things like that. It'll give you news, other HUD topics. There's your GEMS. There's where you go to find out about your formula. If you want to contact somebody at HUD, there's your link there. But this is what it looks like. And this is a listing of our offices across Indian country and the tribal contacts by region. Who's in what region, in case you want to reach out to another housing authority. Hey, do you got a policy for this? You can do things like that too. This is the region that I come from. I'm from the Eastern Woodlands. So everybody east of the Mississippi, basically. This is all our region, Seminole Native Learning Center. Everybody was within this particular region here. But that's how it's broke up. So it's where you get all of your information, and then it brings you into 2 CFR Part 200 and those resources. And then national best practices. What's happening in Indian country? What are people doing? And then there's some of those publications, NAHASDA, our PIH notices, our HUD income limits, grants.gov for other things that you could compete for, the Federal Register, there's forms, handbooks. So there's a lot of information there, and things that you might want to know more about. This wasn't letting me into this listserv the last time I was in there. I could get in there, but it wasn't really acknowledging that you were trying to get in. So you need to know the rules for applying guidance. Program-specific requirements are followed when they are provided. They're not always provided. If you can't find them within the statute or the regs, or a program guidance, or a PIH notice, chances are you're going to have to go to the uniform guidance at 200. Because it's finance, audit related, something like that. The uniform guidance is followed when program-specific requirements are not provided in accordance with 24 CFR 1026. And to understand them, you have to research first the statute, then the regulations, then the PIH notices, then the program notices, and then the uniform guidance if necessary. For our programs, the Indian Housing Block Grant, our program-specific requirements are generally not duplicated. So it'll speak to one thing in the statute, then it'll refer you down to the regulations, but it's going to tell you another piece. It won't tell you the same thing as here, usually, okay? So you have to kind of use them all. But you learn how to do it, that way. And you learn about other things you weren't looking for sometimes because you're trying to scan it and find it. So the NAHASDA administrative flow statutes, the federal law written by Congress. Regulations are written to implement the statutes. Our notices and our guidances, those are official transmittals, and the guidances were written to assist us as tribes. Now, where you can get into a little bit of trouble, okay, we're going to use procurement as an example and a threshold. Let's say the procurement threshold is $250,000. If you haven't updated your procurement policy, or the people that pass the policy put a lower threshold in place, I could go out and the federal threshold could be $250,000. Your tribal threshold could be $100,000, and I could make a purchase for $150,000 without taking all these steps. And I could get in just as much trouble. I didn't break the federal one, but I broke my own policy. So your tribal policy, your housing policy can actually be stricter, and you have to adhere to the strictest one. So you'll get just the biggest finding for breaking your own tribal policy. So make sure that your policies are up to date, first of all, and that they're following them. Should the thresholds, like for procurement and things like that, be of a lesser amount, okay? So the reason I use this as a guidance, there was a guidance that came out in 2023 that allows you to raise our micro purchase threshold greater than 50,000. Certain things you have to take a institutional risk assessment. It's not a one and done. It's, you do it on a yearly basis, make sure that it's available should they decide to audit that. And it's only to be used when you're expending NAHASDA dollars. So it wouldn't help the tribe as a whole, but it would help your NAHASDA program. And it applies to our Indian Housing Program and the Native Hawaiian Program. So micro purchase thresholds, you self-certify, you have to have good audits, things like that. But there's things like this that the NAHASDA statute allows you to do. Labor laws, things like that. We'll talk about that later in the week that you're allowed to do. But it only applies when you're talking about NAHASDA funds. It doesn't go over and spill. There's no spillage into the tribal allowance, okay? So this is how you would raise this particular threshold. So there's your hierarchy of your guidance, your statute, your NAHASDA statute, your regulations at 24 CFR Part 1000, your PIH notices, your program guidances, and then that uniform guidance at 2 CFR 200. So it is a self-determination program. You have maximum flexibility in defining your program within your established requirements. The guidelines are constructed within the NAHASDA statute. It's 54 pages long, color-coded by amendment. The regulations at ECFR Title 24, Part 1000 is the Native American Housing Activities. Our PIH notices and ONAP program guidances, and then the uniform guidance found at Part 200. Uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, audit requirements for federal awards. And remember, the reference material is not duplicative. So we're going to start or finish this day off talking about eligible participants. And then we'll get into some of the payments charged and things like that tomorrow, okay? You need to know what you can do with your money, who you can serve. So in the creation and the administration of your housing program, you're going to have multiple decisions as a board member that you need to make. You're going to shape your program that you offer your tribal members. Many of those decisions, though, you find out, especially once you go through, trainings and programs such as this, Are decisions created as a result of the laws that we have to follow to make sure that we're NAHASDA compliant? We can't always do what we want because we have to adhere to the law governing the money. So that decision-making authority is dependent on how you've structured your housing program. If you have a housing board of commissioners, do you have a tribal council liaison? Do they have a vote? Do you need them for a quorum? Do they report to the tribal council on your behalf? Or do you still have to do that? Or does your executive director still does that? If you receive a stipend, do they receive a stipend for sitting on that board? Those are all questions that you have to make sure that are answered when it pertains to that tribal council liaison. You're seeing a lot of people put them in place just to make sure, because they have the ultimate authority. The tribal council has the ultimate authority for those funds. They're the ones that allow it to come down the way that it's structured now. Under the 1937 Housing Act, and that's why if you've got an old person like me that's been around, we were under a system where we were total separate. That they wanted that arm's length between the tribes. As of the passage of NAHASDA, it's not like that anymore. The tribe has the ultimate responsibility. So Board of Commissioners, you're responsible for, if you have one in place, for establishing housing related policies, plans, which carry out effectively those statutory, regulatory, contractual obligations associated with housing finance, development, and management. You as a board govern on behalf of those who are not seated at your table. Individually, commissioners are members of the board. Collectively, in a properly called meeting, they become your Board of Commissioners. Actions by the Board of Commissioners can be only made during a meeting when you have a quorum, in accordance with the ordinance that establishes your BOC. It's vital that you become familiar immediately with your bylaws of your Board of Commissioners. If you haven't seen those, go ask for them. You need them. It tells you all sorts of things about the position that you're holding now. This module, today and tomorrow, are going to have various examples about some of the required board and tribal decisions. Do you offer tribal preference and selection? Do you have priorities in your selection? Your continued occupancy. Do you continue to service your tribal members in your low rent programs? Okay. Low rent was for people below 80% of median income. Okay. You are now allowed under NAHASDA to serve tribal members, if you decide you want to undertake that, up to 10% of your grant. Has to be in your IHP as an activity. Your tribal members that fall between 80 and 100%. Your A&O policy has to discuss that and permit it, but it also should be discussing the continuation of services in your low rent program. If there's no place for them to go, a lot of our tribes will say, they can stay in here, we're going to charge them more rent. Or they can stay within our program and stay at the rent that they've been paying this whole time. But your A&O policy has to address that. Are you going to require them to transfer programs if you offer something else? We had fair market for people that were above 80% of median income here, or non-tribal members, because you're supposed to be only servicing Native people. Unless, of course, they're essential or law enforcement, and we're going to teach you about that too. Do you charge them the same amount? Or are you going to charge them up to fair market rent? Or there's a calculation within the reference materials that you can look at that will show you what you can charge them. So providing assistance to non-low income families and those exceptions. Do you have essential families? Who deems them essential? I was allowed to do that as an executive director. I've looked at policies where only the Board of Commissioners can do that. And I've been at places where only the tribal council will deem people essential to their community. Do you serve law enforcement officials? The NAHASDA statute allows you to do that. They have to fit under certain criteria. You have to make a certain statement. And I'll teach you about that also, but not right now. So Do you provide for your 10% authority to provide housing for your tribal members with income that fall between 80 and 100%? Do you have it listed in your IHP? Do you describe it? Do you describe that in your A&O policy? So your program recipient eligible families. This is near and dear to my heart, are all your ducks in a row? I sometimes felt privileged when all my ducks were in a circle. Tribal housing is a hard program to run. So eligibility requirements, there's mandated NAHASDA eligibility requirements that your tribal members have to fall under. Gross incomes apply within HUD-defined income limits. There are special exceptions. Have to be a Native American family. Should have started out with Congress appropriates money for low-income Native Americans. That's why we get the money. That's why we're allowed to say, I'm sorry, we don't need to service you. Fair housing laws all do not apply to us because of the way that we receive our money. Okay, but under essential, under law enforcement, we could actually house somebody who is not Native American. Low income means a family whose income doesn't exceed 80% of the median income for your area, as determined by the Secretary with adjustments for smaller and larger families. Secretary may, for the purposes, establish income ceilings higher. Let's say you're in Mashpee in Cape Cod. You're up in Alaska where everything comes in by barge. You're in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Higher income people. Depending on where you're at, it's based upon the incomes of the counties that you sit in. Okay. So variations are necessary because of prevailing construction cost, higher or lower incomes within the area. The term median income means with respect to an area that is an Indian area, the greater of the median income for the Indian area, which the Secretary shall determine, or the median income for the United States. The NAHASDA statute under Section 4 defines median income with respect to an area that is an Indian area, the greater of the median income for the Indian area, which the Secretary is going to determine, or the median income for the United States. So if the median income limit for a county located within your area is lower than the median income for the United States, you have to use the U.S. median income limit. You want to qualify as many of your people as possible, okay? So the median family income for fiscal year 2025 is $104,200. The adjusted income limits broken down by family size to 80 to 100% are shown below. So a family of 4 at 80% of median income would be $83,360. So we're following this 80% line. You cannot help people that are over 100% of median income unless they are law enforcement or essential, okay? And essential does not mean tribal council. They have to be essential to, I'll teach you about that tomorrow or later. So if you have several counties within your area, okay, my sister tribe, I think they have 7 counties that they're in. You compare the county level, okay, for all of the counties that you have properties, which you service people, and you take the highest one, and then you compare that to the U.S. income. And that's what you state for the year. And this changes every year. So if it's, part of your A&O policy, it should be an addendum on there. And it should read that we will be using the currently published, program guidance for the most up-to-date income limits. I went and I had one client and I went in there and they were using one that was 4 or 5 years old. You know how many people should have qualified that didn't because, the person that was in there, it was attached and they didn't know any better. It didn't have the proper language within there. So those numbers change. Make sure your staff is using the most current ones. They usually come out in spring, May or June. Okay. This one came out May 5th of 2025. Go back and see if you're using the new income limits or if you're still using last year's. This is also within your reference materials. As I said, it can be complicated if you have lands in more than one county. You look at the median income. When it gets published, for every county that you're in, take that highest one, compare it to the national median income. Use the higher of the two, okay? An Indian is defined by NAHASDA as a person who is a member of a federally recognized tribe or a state recognized tribe of which the tribe has met certain conditions in order to be able to receive funds under the U.S. 1937 Housing Act, okay? The tribe itself will determine their own membership criteria and eligibility. HUD doesn't do that. Low income requirements, Section 4 NAHASDA defines median income with respect to an area that is the income or the Indian area, the greater of, as I said, the median income for your Indian area, which the Secretary shall determine, or the median income for the U.S. There is another guidance item that you need to walk through. And it tells you how you go about calculating the income for purposes of eligibility. Make sure that you're doing that correctly. Adopt the income definition for your tribal housing policy. Make sure you give them all of the NAHASDA exclusions. I've been in places where they'll give you travel, but if you get travel, you can't have the babysitting or the childcare. No, you have to give them all to them. You have to give them the federally mandated exclusions. They're up to date within that policy. The old one was from 2012. It got updated last year, so you have a good document right there. Income verifications and the adjusted income for purposes of determining rent. So that document is PIH 2024-07 in your reference materials, and it tells you the steps you have to take. You have to define, first of all, what you're going to use for your definition of income. There's 3 different possibilities. Section 8, census definition or IRS definition. You have to be careful. At one time they said, well, you can use whatever definition or you can use all 3. You could say the one most beneficial to our tribal members or the one most beneficial to the housing authority. If you use that definition and you don't pick of the 3, you need to be able to prove that you're running it all 3 ways and you're treating all the members of the tribe the same. Okay, that can get you into a murky water, so I would suggest you pick one. The IRS definition is fairly easy to use if you don't have a lot of treaty-related income, which means that they don't have to file income tax. There's NAHASDA exclusions in income. Make sure that you follow that, okay? Take an A&O class if you haven't had one. You should all be taking one of those as a board commissioner too. Those federally mandated exclusions was published January 31st of 2024, so they're up to date. They're in these documents. You could read them on the income verifications, what you want to use, third-party income verification, W-2s, pay stubs, all of that. These walk you through the rules that you have to follow for your A&O policy. So your adjusted income, you find out their income, then you adjust it, okay? You get deductions. You students, persons with disabilities, $480 is called the dependent deduction. Elderly and disabled families, $400 for an elderly or disabled family, not for each person, but for the family itself. A lot of mistakes made here. They have to be the head of household. Okay, so it can't be mom living with us that makes us an elder. It can't be the daughter with a disability that makes you a disabled household. They have to be the head of household or the co-head or the sole occupant, okay? Medical and attendant expenses, childcare expenses, earned income of minors, travel expenses, other income. And we're going to go through this more. But you have to give them all of those adjustments. Section 203 in NAHASDA requires that block grant grantees develop written policies governing rents, homebuyer payments charged for your assisted dwelling units. you need those procedures and processes for determining that income eligibility based on their annual and their then adjusted income. Additionally, that section requires that monthly rent or homebuyer payments not exceed 30% of the monthly income of that adjusted amount, okay, of any low-income family residing in an assisted unit. So there's your 3 possible definitions. Policy must state which definition you're using. A lot of times, I just did somebody's policy, helped them a month ago, and it didn't state which one they were using. I said, you're going to get a finding, do not pass go within the first 2 pages of your A&O document. You have to state in there what you're using, okay? If you're using the definition most advantageous to the family or the housing authority, you have to prove that you're running it all 3 ways. That's a lot. You're tripling your work. HUD is revising the Section 8 definition. So this part is a little bit wonky. We had until January 1st of 2024 to live up to and change your definition if you were using Section 8, or if you're one of the people saying you're going to use all 3, that means you had to redo your A&O policy. Okay. So as of January 1st, 2024, it ended with the first document saying, ONAP will be developing guidance and training to help tribes and TDHEs that use the Section 8 definition adjust their policies to reflect the new rules. We'll be in touch with more information in the near future. So I teach A&O, and I'm all over HUD. I'm like, come on, guys, it's October, it's November, it's December. I'm still giving them this message. I have a real good relationship with the Eastern Woodlands office, but I also did that with the Southwest and the Northwest because I teach for them too. I'm like, come on, where's this guidance? And it didn't come out. So then there was another guidance that came out. I will show you right here. Additional guidance, PIH 2023-27. And now we have until, it was up to January 1st of 2025 to come into compliance with HOTMA. And then they came out with a new one in December 5th. They said, we didn't get the guidance out. So December 5th of last year, this guidance came out. Indian tribes, TDHEs that apply the income requirements of 24 CFR Part 5, definition of annual income, will not be required to comply with the changes to this part of HOTMA until January 1st of 2026. So if you use a Section 8 definition, or you use the definition that says I'm going to use all 3, you're going to have your A&O policy rewritten and recertified or readopted to come into compliance with this HOTMA guidance, okay? So make sure you put time on your docket to do this. This publication has still not yet come out. I think it was the elder definition they raised the amount on, okay? You can raise the amount on any of your deductions at any time if you want to as a governing body. What they're going to look at is the cause and effect it's going to have on the rest of how much is it going to cost your money on a yearly basis. They want to make sure that you've looked at that it won't be too costly. And there's been some good, thought process in that, and that you have adopted it through your board of commissioners. You got the meeting minutes saying that you've done that. And then you have to change your A&O policy, and it has to be listed in your IHP when it differs from the standard amounts. Okay, but you can do that. So be ready to keep watching for this HOTMA guidance. Okay, it's going to be important. Whose income counts? The head of household, you got to count everything. Okay, same thing for a spouse, a co-head, any other adult. Dependents, you don't count their employment income. child under 18, it depends. So non-members of live-in aid, you count nothing. Okay. Now, the definition of a live-in aid has changed over the last 5 years or so. The different programs came out and started letting family members be live-in aids and pay for them to take care of someone. When a lot of these rules came about, a live-in aid was somebody that left the household after the person that they were caretaking for was no longer in need of such care or no longer present. So you might want to revisit that. So you don't count any income from a live-in aid. A foster child, you don't count their employment income or any other income that they receive. A foster adult, if you're caring for one, you count their employment income, but not any other money that they receive. A student. Now, the rule for a full-time student, and we're going to get into this more, is a little bit different. If they are not the sole occupant, the head, or the co-head, you can count them as a dependent and get $480. Okay? And then if they make money, you take the $480 back, the first $480, and then they can make up to $50,000 and you don't count it. But only if they are a full-time student and they are not the head, co-head, or sole occupant. Okay? And you have to have proof, that they're in college or as a full-time student. So calculating annual income, there's income exclusion categories, certain benefits, and they're all within those program guidances that you have to follow. Benefits, that should not be counted as income, certain VA benefits, income of certain household members, your live-in aids, amounts that are counted as an asset rather than income, perhaps, your inheritances. So there's a lot of rules to your A&O also. Income from self-employment, cash assets withdrawn, salaries paid to household members from businesses have to be counted. Losses are not counted as zero income. Our losses are counted as zero income, but they're not deducted. Alimony and child support, it depends on if they receive it. This applies to child support. They have to go to the court of jurisdiction and show that they're trying to receive the money, but they're not. And they can give you a letter, and then you don't have to charge them. Assets, there is no asset limitation, but we have to count the income derived from the asset. That's recognized as part of the annual income. The family has to be low income, and you have to keep proof that they were low income forever. It goes from file to file to file. Okay? Depending on what type of household and what type of program they're in, your rental housing, it's when the lease is signed with the family. Home ownership, it's when the mortgage is signed with the family. A rehab program, it's when the agreement is signed with the family. A rental assistance program, it's when you sign that agreement with the landlord. What kind of family? It's based on income. Low-income Indian families, you're allowed 10% of non-low-income families between 80 and 100%. If you put it in your A&O policy, put it in your IHP, you have essential families and you have law enforcement officers. Your eligible Indian families, you can serve any low-income Indian family if they're in your Indian area and you have described that activity and that area within your Indian housing plan. Definition of low income, 80 or less of median income, greater of the Indian area or the U.S. median income limit. So the adjusted income is what is used to determine the payment. Payments are calculated based on the household. So it's the household's adjusted income, not their gross income. The payment for that rent or homebuyer payment cannot exceed 30% of the household adjusted income. Income eligibility has to be verified at the time of the initial assistance, okay? If they've been on your waiting list for any more than a month, you should run it right before they move in to make sure that they're still eligible, okay? Because you can get a finding 15 years later if they're still in your housing that you let them in when they weren't income eligible. And I got one. Somebody that was put in there 10 years before I started. So you got to be careful with that. Income eligibility verified at the time of initial assistance, payment calculated at the time of assistance. You verify by what they call third-party verifications, copies of wage, bank info, income tax return, affidavits of no income. And that adjusted income is derived by subtracting any of the deductions or allowances that are applied to households from the household's annual gross income. The eligibility for deductions depends on what type of household it is. Not all households are eligible for all deductions. So that adjusted annual income, the family's payment is based on a percentage of income. The annual income first has to be adjusted. Take the annual income, subtract the deductions, and you come up with the adjusted income. There's special rules apply. They got to be, the head of household, the spouse, the co-head, or the sole member in order to qualify for certain deductions, or they can't be in that position to receive certain deductions. There's statutory exclusions and deductions. They are applicable regardless of which method of calculating annual income is used. $480 dependent deduction, children under the age of 18, persons with disabilities over 18, full-time students over the age of 18 as long as they are not the head, co-head, or sole occupant. $400 for an elderly or disabled family. Remember, it has to be the co-head, head of household, or sole occupant. Medical and attendant expenses over 3% of income. Only are you allowed the medical expense deduction if they are first declared an elderly or disabled family. We have a lot of slippage in Indian country in this area, okay? Attendant for a disabled person to allow a family member to go to work. Not volunteer, have to be able to go to work. Child care expenses that enable a family member to work or to go to school or to look for work. Earned income of minors under 18 doesn't count. Travel expenses not to exceed $25 per family per week, not per person, $1,300 a year max. You set your travel expense, excess travel expense distance. So I'm 20 to 25 miles from the nearest town, nearest college. We set it at 20. So more people would qualify. Other exclusions provided for within your local housing policy, and then it would have to also be in your IHP. I talked about the full-time student. Remember, it does not apply if they are the head of household or co-head. Adult students living away from home, or even an adult member of the family. If you're using that person to slide up that scale that we looked at further, and you're counting them within the income there, you have to count their income, okay? You should have a full-time student verification form for those full-time students. Qualifying as a dependent, those in the household who are under the age of 18 or a full-time student, as long as they aren't the head, co-head, or sole occupant. The head of the family, the spouse, and the co-head can never qualify as a dependent under any program, okay? A foster child, an unborn child, a child that is yet to join the family, or a live-in attendant may never be counted as a dependent. Your elderly or family disabled deduction only if the head, the co-head, the spouse is 62 years of age or older, or a person with disabilities. So you might call somebody a near elder at 55 or 60 or whatever you do. You need to specify within your A&O policy of what age they're going to qualify as an elder or disabled family. And you have to put that in your A&O policy and your IHP if it's not 62, the difference, okay? A disabled household is one in which it's the head, the spouse, or the sole member with the disabilities, okay? Or two or more people living together, Elderly household, same thing. Head, spouse, sole member, 62 years of age or older. I know I'm close to the end, that's why I'm rushing. Or one or more persons, who are at least 62 years of age or older. Your medical and attendant deductions, they're deductible for elderly and disabled families only to the extent that that medical expense of the family is more than 3% of the annual income, and the attendant care expenses are deductible for any family with a disabled household member when the expense allows that family member to attend work or school, and the expenses are more than 3% of the family's annual income. So that's a deduction example. The Cloud family has an anticipated annual income of $25,000, anticipated medical of $3,000, not covered by insurance. Now, this is another area your A&O people need to be trained. Indian Health is insurance. If they're receiving Indian Health, they wouldn't be eligible for this deduction, okay? 25,000 times 3% is 750. 3,000 minus 750 equals a $2,250 deduction. Expenses can include medical expenses in the case of an elder or disabled family, reasonable attendant care, auxiliary apparatus expenses for each family member who is a person with disabilities, to the extent necessary to enable any member of the family, including the member who is the person with disabilities, to be employed. Your deduction eligibility, they're only eligible for the deduction if the expense is paid out of pocket by the family, not reimbursed by an outside source such as insurance, Medicare, grants, state agency, charitable organizations, Indian Health, anticipated to be paid by the household in the 12 months following the date of their admission or their recertification. Child care expenses enables a family member to be gainfully employed. The amount deducted should not exceed the employment income. It's to seek employment, further his or her education. The amount is not paid or reimbursed. It's a deduction. The child care expenses incurred to permit a family member must not exceed the amount earned by the family member, which is made available to work during the hours for which child care is paid. So if they make $200 making fry bread and selling it at the tribal office, they can't charge $300 worth of child care expenses. It could only be $200, okay? And when it says that another member of the household is not available to watch them, if they've got somebody there that's working as a bartender or in the casino till 2 o'clock in the morning and they need that child care first thing in the morning, that person, even though the body's there, you got to realize needs sleep. So, you really got to give them some grace when it comes to that. To document the child care expenses to be deducted, your household has to identify the child or children who's going to be cared for, identify the family member unable to go to work or school because of the child care, demonstrate that no other household member is available to care for the children. This is where, they might be there, but they're not available. They need sleep. Identify the child care provider, provide documentation of costs. So you're going to need a child care policy. How old are you going to pay for it? Up to 12, 13, that should all be listed there. And a child care verification form that the provider is showing you how much they're getting paid for. The excessive travel, same thing. You're going to need a policy within your A&O policy. The allowances for the benefit of families who must travel long distances to and from work or school. Important to remember, this allowance can only be allowed for excessive travel for employment or education purposes. It has to be reasonable, may not exceed $25 per week for the entire household, not the family, so $1,300 per year. Make sure you have your criteria and policy. We would ask for a Google map from the school or, to the work location, whatever. It's helped a lot of traveling nurses qualify, actually. So that is it. If you have any questions, please leave them on the side. Please come back tomorrow. There's a lot of good stuff. And thank you for those of you who joined us. I'm sorry some of you guys joined us late. It's 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. If you ever need anything, there is my information. And Brooke is back at you because she's got something she needs you to do. And thank you. Come back tomorrow.
Yay! Thank you so much for kicking off day one, Cheryl. Such important information. I have put a link to the webinar feedback survey for everybody in the chat. It just takes 2 or 3 minutes to complete. It's anonymous, so you don't have to feel weird about like your name or your email being attached to it. And it just lets us know at the Native Learning Center what things are working well, what we can improve upon. And we do share the feedback with our instructors, so it helps everybody involved if you don't mind taking a few minutes to complete that. We hope you can join us for day 2 That's going to be tomorrow. It's going to be 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska. This is going to be day 205 tomorrow. You'll just log into the website like you did today, and you'll see a green banner at the top of your screen that you can click on to join the webinar. You'll be able to access this as well as our other recorded webinars on our webinar archive that's on our YouTube channel. The link is there, and then it's also for you in the shared notes section. I'll put that in the chat momentarily. Please check out our other upcoming training events. We post about them to our various social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And if you are a podcast listener, we have an in-house produced podcast, the Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast. You can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. And then we also post the videos with the interviews with our special guests to our YouTube channel as well. But that is all we have for you folks today. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and we hope to connect with you again really soon.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Thanks again, Cheryl. Have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, my girl.